Welcome back to the second part of the arterial system of the body, and this time we'll be looking at the arterial system of the heart. In the last video, we saw that all of the arterial blood that is supplied to the body takes origin from major vessels which are coming from the aorta. The aorta gives out three major vessels and then they continue to branch and divide and ultimately supply the body. And in the last video, we also saw that the aorta has different parts. So this part is the ascending aorta. The ascending aorta continues as the arch of aorta and the arch descends. This is the thoracic aorta, and then the thoracic aorta continues below the diaphragm as the abdominal aorta. So the aorta comes from the left ventricle. And there is something called the aortic valve. And after the aortic valve, we have the ascending aorta. So now we are going to look at the aortic valve and the ascending aorta and how the coronary arteries take origin from this region and supply the heart. Now first we look at the aortic valve. So this is how the aorta begins. This is the aortic valve and the ascending aorta, the arch, as we just saw. Now let's take a cross section at this plane. And if we view this from the top, from a superior view, and assume that this is the anterior and this is posterior. So this is a cross section of the aortic valve. Now the aortic valve is a tricuspid valve. So we have three cusps. Now these are the three cusps, and if this is anterior and this is posterior, we have a left cusp, we have a right cusp, and we have a posterior cusp. Now these cusps are actually similar to a folded umbrella. Say this is the umbrella. So when the heart pumps blood, it goes up, and then when there's a backflow, these cusps will fill with blood and prevent its backflow. I'll explain it in detail, but this is the basic idea of how the cusps and the entire aortic valve works. So let's take a section from this region. We are going to split this from here. So as we start to separate, this is the left, right, the posterior. And finally, when we linearly arrange it, when we separate it entirely, this is how they look. They are like tiny bowls or like a folded umbrella, as I showed you. So this is where they fill with the blood. Now we'll take a closer look at individual cusps. All of them look the same, but they have few parts. Now you have seen here that these cusps are in contact with each other and these edges are thickened, and the thickened edge is called a lunule. And this part here, the apex is also thickened and it's called the nodule. And since it's like a bowl, there's some space here which can fill with blood, and that is called the sinus. It's an aortic sinus. And this is the same for all of the cusps. So now we have three aortic sinuses in each of the cusps. So we have a left aortic sinus, a right aortic sinus, and a posterior aortic sinus. Now if we look at them properly, they have a lunule, they have two lunules, they have the nodules, and this is the aortic sinus. So if this is the left aortic sinus and this is the right aortic sinus, the coronary arteries take origin from these sinuses. So the left coronary artery takes origin from the left aortic sinus. The right coronary artery takes origin from the right aortic sinus. Or to be specific, the mouth of the left and the right coronary arteries lie in the left and the right aortic sinuses respectively. So what happens during systole and diastole? Now during systole, the ventricles contract. So once they contract, blood is pushed up into the aorta. So the valves have to open. So the aortic valve opens. Now during diastole, it will relax. So there will be backflow of blood because there's a fall in pressure. Now to prevent the backflow of blood during diastole, the aortic valve closes. So they open during systole to allow the flow of blood, and during diastole they close again to prevent the backflow of blood. So this is how the valve looks during systole and diastole. This is during systole, the valves are opening. And this is during diastole, the valves are closed. Now this is a superior view. And this is viewing from the side. This is the opening of the aortic valve. These three are the cusps. So this is the left aortic sinus in the left cusp. This is the right aortic sinus in the right cusp. Sorry, this will be the right, this will be the left, and this is the posterior. So from the left aortic sinus we are getting the left coronary artery. From the right aortic sinus we are getting the right coronary artery. But remember, this is during systole. So these cusps will have to close up and allow blood to flow through the gap between them. So you can see these are the cusps here inside. This is how they look, and this is the opening in between through which blood goes up. So we have the left ventricle here below. From the left ventricle, blood is being pumped and it goes up. Now during diastole, the left ventricle will relax, pressure will fall, so the blood will tend to come back. So to prevent that, the valve closes. Now this time, when the blood is going to fall back, the blood has gone up during diastole, it's going to come back and fall into these cusps when they close. So they are filled with blood. And this time the sinuses have the coronary arteries coming out from them, and these get filled, and then they supply the heart. So this is how it looks during diastole. Each of the aortic sinuses is filled with blood, and the right and the left aortic sinus give rise to the right coronary artery and the left coronary artery, which are filled with blood and supply the heart. So now let's look at the supply of the heart. How these coronary arteries travel in the heart. So this is looking at the heart from the anterior view. We have the aorta, the pulmonary trunk, the superior vena cava, and the green one here is the right coronary artery and its branches. The purple is the left coronary artery and its branches. So we have the right coronary artery and the left coronary artery. Now as we have seen, the right coronary artery takes origin from the right aortic sinus. The left coronary artery takes origin from the left aortic sinus. Now near the origin of the right coronary artery, it gives out a branch to the sinoatrial node, and this is called the SA nodal branch or the sinoatrial nodal branch. So this is the first branch of the right coronary artery. Then it continues along the coronary sulcus and it gives out a right marginal branch. This vessel, as you can see, is running along the right border of the heart. So this is called the right marginal branch. This right marginal branch runs towards the apex of the heart. This place is the apex of the heart, It runs towards the apex of the heart, but it never reaches the apex. So the coronary artery turns behind, runs at the posterior aspect of the heart. Now we can roughly assume that we have the atria here, we have the ventricles here. So this would be the atrioventricular groove. Somewhere here would be the interatrial groove, and this would be the interventricular groove here. So it gives off a branch in the interatrial groove. We have a branch coming off here. Now this branch is called the atrioventricular nodal branch, which supplies the AV node. So atrioventricular nodal branch. And there is another branch in the posterior interventricular groove. We have the ventricles here, so this would be the interventricular groove. This is called the posterior interventricular branch. So these are the branches, and this is the course of the right coronary artery. Now let's look at the left. The left coronary artery originates from the left aortic sinus. Now it passes between the pulmonary trunk and the left auricle. So it's coming out of the aorta. The aorta is overlapped by the pulmonary trunk here. That's why the aorta has a dotted line. Now it runs behind the pulmonary trunk, but between the pulmonary trunk and the left auricle, and then it descends on the anterior aspect of the heart. Now it again runs in the coronary sulcus, and it divides into two vessels, two arteries. Now one is the circumflex branch. This one here, which turns and goes behind, is the circumflex branch. And this one descending anteriorly is the anterior interventricular branch, or the left anterior descending artery. The term left anterior descending artery is not used that much now, which is called the LADA. It's the anterior interventricular branch. This here is the anterior interventricular branch. Now the anterior interventricular branch is running around the anterior interventricular groove. Just like we had the posterior interventricular branch running in the posterior interventricular groove, we have an anterior interventricular branch in the anterior interventricular groove. And this runs to the apex of the heart, and it turns around the inferior border of the heart and goes back anastomosis with this posterior interventricular branch. Now the circumflex branch, it follows the coronary sulcus and goes to the posterior surface of the heart. But before that, we have another vessel coming out from here. It's called the left marginal branch. Just like the right marginal branch is supplying the right border, we have a left marginal branch which supplies the left border of the heart. One more thing, the anterior interventricular branch, it also gives out another branch, this vessel here. It's called the lateral branch or the diagonal artery. So we have the left coronary artery arising from the left aortic sinus, comes, descends, splits into circumflex branch and the anterior interventricular branch. Anterior interventricular branch gives out a diagonal artery, and it also gives perforating branches to the interventricular septum. Then the circumflex branch here, before leaving, it gives out a left marginal branch, and then it runs behind and goes to the posterior surface of the heart. Now, what parts of the heart do each of these coronary arteries supply? We'll start with the right coronary artery. Now the right coronary artery is sending a branch to the SA node, and this supplies the SA node in 60% of the people. So we have the SA node being supplied by the right coronary artery. And the right coronary artery is also supplying the right atrium and the right ventricle. So we'll add the right atrium, the right ventricle. It comes down and it's supplying the left ventricle as well, but only the diaphragmatic surface. So the left ventricle as well. Now the interventricular septum at the posterior aspect is supplied by the posterior interventricular branch, but only the posterior 1/3 of it. So we have the interventricular septum, and it's also supplying the AV node. Now the AV node is supplied by the right coronary artery in almost 80% of the people. Coming to the left coronary artery, it supplies all of the remaining parts which are not supplied by the right coronary arteries, and also supplies the SA node in 40% of the people. So if we take into account whatever is missing, the left side is the left coronary artery supplying the left atrium, most of the left ventricle, a part of the right ventricle, and the interventricular septum, which would be the anterior 2/3. So this is the arterial system of the heart. The green is the right coronary artery, the one in purple is the left coronary artery. The right coronary artery takes origin from the right aortic sinus. At the origin, it gives out a branch to the SA node in 60% of the people. It travels along the coronary sulcus and it supplies a right marginal branch supplying the right border of the heart. It travels behind to the posterior aspect of the heart, gives off a branch to the AV node and another branch along the posterior interventricular groove. The left coronary artery takes origin from the left coronary sinus, passes between the pulmonary trunk and the left auricle, and travels and gives out two branches, a circumflex branch and an anterior interventricular branch, which gives out a diagonal artery. The anterior interventricular branch goes behind the inferior border of the heart and anastomosis with the posterior interventricular branch. The circumflex branch, before going to the posterior aspect of the heart, gives out a left marginal branch supplying the left border of the heart. And then the circumflex branch continues at the posterior aspect of the heart to anastomosis with the right coronary artery. The right coronary artery is supplying the right side of the heart, so the right atrium, right ventricle, and the left ventricle's diaphragmatic surface, and 1/3 of the interventricular septum at the posterior aspect. And the AV node and SA node are also supplied by the right coronary artery. The left coronary artery supplies the left side of the heart, so the left atrium, left ventricle, and a part of the right ventricle as well, and the anterior 2/3 of the interventricular septum. Now coming to the dominance of the coronary arteries. How do we determine the dominance of these arteries? So to determine which coronary artery is dominant, whether the right coronary artery or the left coronary artery, we have to look for the posterior interventricular branch, which is also called the posterior descending artery. Now this branch, as we saw just now, is usually a branch of the right coronary artery. That is in about 67% of the people. The posterior interventricular branch is a branch of the right coronary artery, meaning most of the people have a dominant right coronary artery, meaning 67% of the people have a right-sided dominance. The right coronary artery is the dominant one. In 15% of the people, there is a left coronary artery dominance. And in 18% of the people, both are codominant. So, in 67%, the right coronary artery is dominant. It means there's almost an equal supply of both right coronary artery and the left coronary artery. In 15% we have the left coronary artery dominance, and in 18% these arteries are codominant. Now for the last part, any aberrations, that is what is deviating from the normal. So in 4% of the people, an accessory coronary artery is present. The second one is the SA nodal branch we saw a few minutes back. 60% of the SA nodal branches arise from the right coronary artery and 40% from the left coronary artery. So 60% of the people have an SA nodal branch arising from the right coronary artery and 40% from the left. Now in the left coronary artery, when it arises from the circumflex branch of the left coronary artery. This is a summary of the supply and the branches of the coronary arteries. We have the right coronary artery and the left coronary artery arising from the coronary sinuses. These are their branches and these are the parts of the heart that they supply. Thank you for watching this video, and if you liked it, please do subscribe for more such videos.